artificial intelligence,
data, analytics,
User group.
AIDA UG.
Okay, so I welcome my panel. So nobody take the first row. I guess it's pretty smart because with COVID we're just going to throw things at you. Okay, so before we start, I didn't have any questions for 45 minutes, so I recorded the documentary and we're going to start it right away.
That's ridiculous. Only horoscopes can predict the future.
That's what we used to think, until we invented this.
So, with having said that, I don't know if you heard it,
We're
but
not sitting where we're supposed to be.
Yeah, we need to reorganize. If you used some AI, you would have had it reorganized once we sat down.
Yeah. It's actually a game, so I knew I was there, Christophe too, so it's you guys, competitors, probably. It helps.
I mean, as it relates to hair?
Well, I won that fight.
So I'm Jean-Georges, or JGP. I'm the president of AIDA UG, which is an AI user group, and I'm also co-founder and the board member of the French Tech. So I must admit that I wrote the questions over the last few days, and they have no clue about what I'm going to ask them. Okay? And with us we've got. And they'll introduce themselves in much more, but we've got Shadi, who leads product offering at SAS. Okay, so everybody knows SAS. Who doesn't know SAS here? Okay, there's always one. So SAS is a small startup started by Dr. Goodnight, not too far away from here, our local startup, successful startup. Then we've got Christophe. So Christophe is coming right from France. So he probably have a similar accent than me when he's going to talk.
Yeah, yours is better than mine.
I've been here longer. And he's a scientific director at SKEMA. Okay, so SKEMA hosting us. But SKEMA is not this traditional business school. They do research and they do science. And Christophe is their scientific director. And he recently published a pretty interesting paper on digital transformation and the impact of digital transformation on performance. That's a very nice idea. And just there, Seth leads AI at IBM. So I'm really pleased to have Seth today. And you recently also received the AI Inventor of the Year award from the AI Summit. Congratulations on that. So. Having said that, that was my 2-second introduction. I think you've got more to say. So Seth, get started. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So, as Jean-Georges said, I'm Seth Dobrin. I'm the Global Chief AI Officer at IBM. I'm responsible for everything from strategy to execution to how we leverage AI internally, as well as data governance, AI ethics, implementation of AI ethics, that is, and things like that in the company. Been with IBM about 5 years. Before I was at IBM, I was at one of our customers, so I was at Monsanto, where I led their data and AI transformation. Monsanto is probably one of the best, most successful corporate legacy transformations, digital transformations that's occurred. I was honored to be part of that.
Christophe?
Yeah, so I'm very happy to be with you. So I'm coming from Paris, and my aim is to make strategy and to reconcile strategists and technologists. And I try to fill the gap, and I'm developing systems that lead toward augmented strategy. So this is what I'm trying to do. Yeah, and which are sustainable, because these days we have to make something that is sustainable.
So Shadi, as you said, I'm at SAS. Been there 3 years. So I'm responsible for the product strategy. So for our portfolio, which is from data ingestion to advanced analytics, Before that, I was at Red Hat, which I used to come to this campus every day for a little while as we were here, and I led their data and BI practice, more on the practitioner side. Now I get to build the products that people use or want to use.
So I have a list of questions, okay? And if you want to bounce back on something, we're not a big group, but maybe you can just raise your hand when you've got something, and I point to you. I don't want to have all the questions. I already have all the answers anyway. We're going there. So first, we've got a mixed audience of business professionals and students, and so I'd like to know how you get started learning AI when you were a student. Is anyone taking it? Christophe, maybe that's one pre-done for you.
So about AI, I must say that it came after. So.
And what advice would you give to students? Students, we've got students in the audience. What advice would you give regarding AI?
So artificial intelligence, so the point is you need to have a minimum mathematics background first. And you can now also, what becomes very interesting is we can use some low-code, no-code platform. And that can achieve some more and more interesting results. So what is very interesting is that you understand the business and you can use some powerful algorithm that are pretty easy to use, and that allow you to achieve some augmented results. Yeah. Yeah. But after, of course, if you want to develop things, of course, you need to have some mathematics and these kind of things.
So, Seth and Shadi, from a business standpoint, okay, what would you recommend, like, to professionals that wants to know more about AI?
Let me go back to the student.
Okay, sure.
So I'm a geneticist by training, and so people often scratch their head and say, well, how did you get here? So when I was doing my PhD, I was studying Amish populations, and Amish populations are very, we call it consanguous, but it's inbred, right? They're uncles, nieces, fathers, you know, and so typical algorithms that we use for genetics didn't work. And this was also the time of the Human Genome Project, and so we were getting all this massive data, and Excel couldn't handle it, typical programs couldn't handle it, and so I had to teach myself how to code. And this was in late 90s. Started with Perl, that didn't go very far. Someone introduced me to this thing called R, that was version 0.8, and so started learning R. And this was massive data even today. We're talking, my dissertation was 25 gigabytes of data, which is, you know, in the 90s was huge, right? And so how do you process that? My dissertation ended up being written in Python 0.3. It took 3 months to run. And that was once I got it to run. It would run and stop. We would get caught in these loops that we had to figure out how to break, and it would essentially, the computer would shut down. And so I got into AI, and I taught myself how to code. At that point, my most advanced math was Calc 3. I taught myself linear algebra. I taught myself, and this was a time where there were no packages. We were writing packages ourselves, so I had to figure out how to write these algorithms in code. And so my advice to students is, you're a student, you're never going to have an opportunity to spend time learning more than you will right now. If you're graduate students, you are going to be the most skilled person in your field if you're just getting your dissertation. When you defend, you will know more about your field at that point than anyone else in the world, and it'll all go downhill from there. So take the time as a student to learn about your field, bring other areas in to differentiate yourself, and that only helps you in the future. Getting to the business question now, in today's business world, you have to keep learning. You have to be an active learner. Every day you have to spend time learning. I encourage my teams to spend 20% of their time every month learning. So a day a week, I encourage them to spend time learning, enriching themselves. That's how important I think it is. The benefit to me is I have people that are very advanced in the field, and they want to stay. And so from a business perspective, it's all about learning.
I'll address both questions. I was a music and theater major, so really nothing to do with my field.
I want an
of
air, you
career.
want it.
Yeah, that's right.
Most
I wanted-
out of outlandish field to be an AI,
That's
an AI
correct.
from.
And what my recommendation is just be curious and be a critical thinker. It doesn't really matter what technology you use at the end of the day, and I'm saying that as a software vendor, right? If you have the ability to use reasoning to solve a problem, you need to double down on that or learn how to think critically. Because you can apply whatever method, technology, tooling, or science behind it. And I think that's, if you're a student, that works. And if you're in the business context, that works. As a student, you do get to dedicate your time to doing that, so you can take that and apply it to a specific domain. As a business person, you already have the domain established for you. And so technology is just an enabler. Find the problem you're trying to solve and be curious about solving it. Don't be constrained by, well, we've always done it this way, or these are the only things I have at my disposal. Those are just excuses at the end of the day. Break the problem down and try to solve it. And again, I'm in a career that I would have never chosen for myself, right? But that's where I got to by just keep solving the next problem. It's not, there's no, I don't think there's a recipe for this, right? There is no, if I went to an undergrad or graduate student and said, here's the book for you to become a chief data officer or a chief technology officer. There's no playbook for that, right? It's simply apply what you're best at in your method, but think critically about the problem. And then, find, the thing I think I struggle with when I talk to students is it's the experimentation phase. It's good to want to experiment, whether it's school or in the business, but at some point you have to show results. And so if you're writing a dissertation, I'm assuming, and I haven't done one of those, you got to go a pretty long way to solving that specific problem. But in the business context, solve one problem at a time and take your wins when you can, and don't be afraid to fail. That would be my advice.
Dissertation, solving one problem at a time.
So no one wants to bounce back?
Yeah, so I think that now we can, the challenge is to really democratize these kind of technologies, and now we have the opportunity, because this technology becomes easier and easier, the languages are becoming easier and easier, there is also we converge, the science and technology are converging, R and Python also are converging, so it gives, great abilities to people to solve more and more complex problems, strategic issues that can lead towards sustainability, and now we need really to achieve that. And to solve a problem, if you understand it, that's 80% of the solution. So in one way, if we have only the machine alone, we'd go nowhere. And I think that for very complex problems, and of course on the other side, human alone is impossible as well. So now we have great abilities with this convergence of technologies to democratize and be able to really solve more complex issues, and that can lead to sustainability. Now we reach this level.
I think we need to be careful about where we are with the technology today and the concept of democratizing AI. There are some aspects of it that you can democratize, but at the same time, the technology is not at a state where the technology can understand the nuances of choosing one model versus another, or the nuances of using one feature versus another, or the nuances of adjusting for bias and what impact that has on your model. So I think democratizing simple, basic types of AI, or basic regressions, basic trees, is fine. As you start getting more advanced, the model you choose could be the absolutely wrong model and could drive a wrong decision for the business, which, you're not talking Alexa or Siri here, you're talking could affect life, could affect health, could affect wealth, could affect your livelihood. Right? And so when we're implementing AI in business, I'm all about democratization, but you need some supervision of people that really know what they're doing. And then you hinted at this, and I think, Shadi, you hinted at this a little bit too. When we build AI in business, we often start with the business problem, and we don't think about the human. And we actually need to turn that around, and we need to start with the human and say, how are we going to make this human's life better, cheaper, and faster? Why are we building this model in the first place? How is it going to be used? Who's going to be using it? And where is it going to be used? These are all important questions that before you start building an AI, you need to explore the human side of it to understand what is the real question that needs to be addressed.
So that's why it's a teamwork.
Exactly.
So it's not only technologists, because it used to be a lot of technologists, and that's why for very complex problems, such as for strategy, so perhaps we couldn't achieve the result we wanted. So the magic comes from integrating different guys, but if they don't have the minimum background, so they cannot talk to each other, and therefore we cannot go and solve complex problems.
Do you think there's a link to ethics there?
There better be.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
If you're asking that question in your position, Jean-Georges, we're in trouble.
Well, you know, I play dummy here. So I hear you when you say that, okay, I hear you, Christophe, you were speaking about low-code, no-code platform. I hear you that it's not as easy as it seems. So where are we? Okay, where are we now, and what can we expect like in 2022? Can I have a version of VIA that does everything for me next year?
You shouldn't want that. Because the last thing you want is the machine to make every decision. Some decisions you want the machine to make, right? You want the reminder, learn my daily routine and wake me up at the same time every day, no problem. You want the autonomous car? Okay, we can get there. Do you want an AI making a decision on what you should eat on a daily basis, or what company you should acquire, or who gets what grant or what benefit? At some point, the decision becomes so important that they need to be supervised, they need to be monitored, and they have to context with them. You can open any kind of journal and see the biases or the decision that are completely off basis. Not because that the machine is evil, the machine doesn't know, doesn't care, right? It's just the algorithm we fed it and the bias we fed it. So at the end of the day, I don't want the machine to be fully automated. I need the human, and we say human in the loop or out of the loop, right? You need the human involved. And again, some things, sure, let the system make all the decisions for me. It doesn't matter. I'm still not completely comfortable with the autonomous car. That's a personal thing of mine. But I do remember the horror stories not too long ago where they wouldn't recognize people if they were of the wrong skin color, right? Because the computer vision models failed to recognize anybody that wasn't white. So, yes, can we get there? Sure. We can build technology and the best rocket we could ever build. I don't think we should without the ethics in mind and the responsibility in mind.
I mean, today, SAS has VIA, we have Watson Studio, Data Robot, Data IQ, Domino Data Labs, Google. We all have automated AI capabilities. We all have visual coding capabilities that can do very sophisticated things. Should we let them do very sophisticated things without supervision? I already gave my perspective on that. And I think, you know, to Shadi's point, math itself is not biased. The databases the data sits in are not biased. The bias came from past decisions that humans made. And by leveraging AI and ensuring that the decisions that the computer is helping humans to make, not making on its own, helping humans to make, we can actually remove bias and make better, fairer decisions in the future. But we have to do it right, we have to do it thoughtfully. And we can't, to Shadi's point, we can't let the decisions be made by the AI alone when they affect our health, our wealth, our livelihood, national security, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a new perspective. The point is the human, the brain, we aim to solve short-term problems, but we need to achieve long-term now. So perhaps by using this machine, we can achieve long-term perspective.
That's a good point.
Scott had a question.
Kind of based off of your question about who gets to decide this stuff, I mean, it's not just us who are developing it and some autonomous vehicle, but the third party is the government. How do you have any recommendations on what the government should or shouldn't do in terms of controlling, regulating AI?
I think they have a position. I'm not so sure they're attacking it from the right angle. There's a lot of cybersecurity executive orders coming down the pike that are painful for software vendors, not just me, right? They're going to affect us. They're mostly built out of ignorance. This isn't a general statement about government, but when it comes to this technology, which can be confusing at times, right? And so what we've seen is an overreaction, right? You can't, there are, for example, export controls right now on using geospatial data outside of the US. So something as simple as geolocating somebody on a Google map using AI is a no-no, right? So is that the right thing to do? I don't know. I believe the government should introduce controls, not control. So controls in place, parameters by which we measure compliance. And then we adhere to those if we agree. I think the business stakeholders need to be at the table. The ethical controls need to be at the table. Government is supposed to represent the best of us, right? Protect us, guide us. We need a balancing act to that. So yeah, I think the government has a role to play in it. I'm not so sure that we're going down the right path yet.
They can be very heavy-handed.
But I think it's a pendulum, right? There's regardless of political affiliation, right? Growing up in a country like France and now living here, I've seen a little bit of everything, and I don't know that anybody, in a government-only context, I don't know if that gets solved, right? In the business context has to be applied.
Yeah, I think that the invisible hand is very dangerous regarding economy, technology, and as you emphasize, so we really need to have a very strong rules to have a strict limitation, because if not, let's think, I hope to be able to talk about this in, let's say, 20 years, but let's see, yeah.
The regulations that we're seeing are a response to what the citizens of these countries are asking for, right? They're an overreaction, but they're a response. And I think in the space of AI, regulation is really, really important and almost required, but it's got to be precision regulation. And by precision regulation, it's got to regulate certain use cases under certain examples. So for instance, when I'm using an AI to make a hiring decision, that should be regulated. When I'm using an AI to drive a decision about my wealth, my credit, mortgage, things like that, should definitely be regulated. I think, but we can't regulate everything as if it were an HR decision or a livelihood decision. And that's where, we're seeing a little bit of overreach. And the other thing, let's talk about the EU regulation specifically, there was some very vague language in there that we wouldn't know how to comply with. So high quality data. What the hell does that mean? Right? Sure, we all want high quality data. How do I make sure that I'm compliant with that? The good thing is the EU is really listening to feedback from businesses, from universities, from experts, and so they're actually this time, unlike with GDPR, where we saw a lot of churning after the legislation was implemented, we're seeing them listening and responding and having a conversation with us at arm's length, as it should be, before they implement the regulation. So I think they learned from GDPR in the EU. We'll see what happens elsewhere.
I think precision is the point there around, you can't regulate technology wholesale. You can't say AI, right, and there's one coming right now being talked about, AI is under export control. What does that actually mean? Right, we went through this years ago with encryption, right? There are certain types of encryption you can't put in your software if you're going to ship it outside the US, right, because for valid reasons. You can't put, what is AI in the first place? Is that just machine learning? Is it all advanced analytics? What do you mean by that? And so I think precision matters, and as you're alluding to, business use cases are the ones that need to be applied to.
Yeah, we had a question in the back.
Yeah, just to go back to the Seth's point, you mentioned about math is unbiased, and I would like to go for the risk of the automated AI, automated machine learning is that don't you think that the data we have is also biased? Because back to the Shadi's point, why computer vision and image recognition do not recognize colored people is because we have 95% of the white people imaged as a sample.
Yeah.
So the data is biased, and then if you apply automated machine learning, automated AI, you're going to have a risky result.
Exactly, and that's why I said, I actually said the math isn't biased, the databases aren't biased, it's the decisions that humans made that were biased. But while math itself isn't biased, There is some bias you can introduce, again, which is why you shouldn't rely totally on automated machine learning. There is actually bias you can introduce by the type of model you select. And so you impose a bias based on the type of model you select, because they're going to, machine learning is really, you're using it to discriminate. You're using it to discriminate A versus B. And so we want to discriminate without bias, is what we're trying, without specific biases. We're never going to get rid of every biases. We probably don't want to. We want to get rid of biases that are societally important.
And to be representative of the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
I think it's easy to say, and I had this conversation with someone not too long ago, who said, I want to be able to test all the data, not sample my data. I said, is that really the right thing to do? And as as a chief analytics officer, right, you would say, I need my sample to represent the population I'm going after. And also, if there is bias in the actual economics of it in the world, so if you want to build equality or equity, so you may want to engineer it in a way that is representative of the outcome. So there's always a context to be added to what you're trying to build. Simply throwing a machine, again, to look at learning, and again, we keep using AI and confusing AI and machine learning, right? They're not the same thing, but specifically machine learning, right? You're just looking at what you have and determining the outcome. You need to think of the outcome you're trying to define.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned vision and a lack of a sample, a lack of certain populations. There are places that's easy, right? We just get images of people that have different skin tones from different backgrounds, different bone structures, and actually the problem with the visual recognition is not the skin tone, it's the bone structure. You could swap out white skin for black skin and they still wouldn't work. So it's actually not the skin tone. But there are bigger problems where we don't have people represented in the data at all, even if we wanted them to. Healthcare is a great example. There are entire parts of the population that don't seek healthcare. How do we make sure healthcare AI is inclusive for them? That's a really hard problem.
Yeah, I mentioned the risk because the unbiased data or the biased data can influence in the decision, because if you go for the automated, the model is going to be right. The model is right based on the data we have, but you mentioned about healthcare, but it's the same for mortgage, same for loan.
And there are algorithms that now that we use to check for fairness, that we can look for, very simple things like looking for proper, expected distribution. So I can say, I expect the distribution of mortgages to be equal between men and women. And if they're not, you have bias. Then there's more complex things that we can do too, but there are tons of algorithms out there that look for biases that we apply in these automated fashion. SAS does it, IBM does it, Data Robot does it. We're all in this together. Most of the stuff that we do in bias and fairness is in the open source, because a bad day for Shadi is a bad day for me, right? And so a lot of what the tech companies are doing in the space of AI ethics and bias, we are making freely available. We're working together, and it's really important. I mean, I sit on, open source committees with my competitors. I lead the Linux Data and AI Foundation at SAS, with Amazon, with Google, with Microsoft, with Oracle. We all sit there together, and we're making sure that as an industry, we're helping to make sure that we keep ourselves out of trouble. It's like the oil and gas. An oil leak in the Gulf is bad for all companies, not just the one that caused it.
So that's why human needs to be in the loop, and also we can use more reinforcement learning modeler.
Did you have one, Olivia, or was it okay? Claire-Julia, she's gone. Matthew.
I was just going to kind of ask the question from your guys' perspective in more of a business setting. I would say that most of these mistakes you oftentimes hear about in the news and that are made a big deal out of with AI and things like identifying an individual and biases in the data set are more often mistakes made out of ignorance rather than being malicious intent. It's just that someone did not identify that this was a problem with the data set. And a lot of this, it's how do we identify these kind of unintentional biases when someone's not looking, and how does that affect, for example, when we discuss government control, what are the penalties that we can look at for these unintentional biases, and what is a universal system we can approach to try and identify these? There's not really one good.
Whether you do it on purpose or not, it still has an impact, right? And so design behind it, are there bad actors out there? Yeah, there are people out there building things, and I don't like to use the word right or wrong. It's an accurate model is not representative of the outcome you're trying to define, right? So yeah, it's mathematically accurate, great. But whether it's based on neglect or ignorance or nefarious intent, at the end of the day, back to Seth was saying, there are plenty of things out there that figure out feature weights and explainability and transparency and bias detection. The excuse of ignorance shouldn't exist anymore, right? People who are building these for business purposes need to be aware in the context in which they're building them and then be held accountable for them. I mean, the police will say that, not that I've ever been pulled over, but ignorance of the law, right, is not an excuse to get out of it. So while I hear you, a lot of it happens because I simply made a mistake because I didn't know.
And if you look at one of the oldest, probably one of the first examples of where bias, an AI bias, so are we recording? We're recording. I'm not going to say the name of the company. Like 8 years ago, a financial institution built an algorithm to help their underwriters fund mortgages. The intent of that algorithm was to eliminate bias as much as they could in the process. But they still introduced bias because this was 8 years ago, they really didn't understand how to do it, and they eliminated race and ethnicity and gender, but they had zip code. And the downside is, in New York and a lot of other big cities, black people all live in the same zip code, Jewish people all live in the same zip code, and so zip code became a surrogate for those features that they were trying to eliminate in the first place. They were trying. That was why they were doing this. Today, Shadi already, there's no excuse today. We have tools to prevent it. It is, but the reason we're doing it is because we don't want to. And you mentioned something about regulations. One of the aspects of the EU regulation is for certain types of AI, you need to get it certified. There needs to be some validation by some process, still to be defined, that tech companies like us will probably make a lot of money off of, to certify that these AIs don't have the specific biases that they're in there. That you're not allowed to put it in production until it has it. That's a feature of the proposed regulation.
Franco?
Yes, I have a question for the panel. I run into a lot of older workers that are afraid of the math. Is there a way where somebody that wants to learn but doesn't want to get too involved into all these frameworks can kind of pick up and understand artificial intelligence and ML to a reasonable level? What's your suggestion on that?
Yeah, I think that what is important is to have to be able at least to communicate to each other. I think also we will achieve augmented results by using multidisciplinary teams. Okay, so I emphasize that because if we have only tech guys, we'll have big problems. And I've seen, we developed some courses for that by using AI for strategy, and we use some local no-code platform with guys that have no background in computer science and not specifically very strong background in mathematics. And we led them to touch the power of artificial intelligence by using this low-code no-code platform. And apparently, we collaborate with a big company that we not mention, and apparently we are the leader in many places for that. So I can give you the testimony that we can lead these guys to touch the power and to achieve some pretty nice results. But of course, after if we use neural network, deep learning, and so on, we can make greater things. But we can do that, and my message to these guys is don't be afraid, keep learning, and you will have to learn faster and faster. The skills are, let's say, 5 years. In some sectors, it's only 2 years, and there is an acceleration for that. So don't be afraid, jump, and let's go and learn. We can do this. And I see that, I prove that to you. We can achieve that and lead some guys, and anyway, we need that. If we want to be able to solve very complex problems, and solve real strategic issues and not accountancy, okay, for the short term, we need really to spread the word to a maximum number of guys, and for that we'll have augmented solution and create a better world. Okay, so at least this is what I'm trying to do.
Wonderful, thank you.
So to bounce a little bit on this thing is, what kind of jobs do you see in the AI field at large? Okay, we have people, I got the question a lot of times from people, oh, I want to learn AI. I want to do something in AI. But people don't know, okay? So you can think that even when I started my career as an analyst programmer, and now I see that there's so many different jobs, okay? So is there jobs in AI you see that are more low-hanging fruit that can give someone like the first step to go there? Okay, keep
Dude,
learning,
that's,
guys.
that's a
Keep
broad
learning,
context.
keep
No, I
learning.
would say, listen, in any business context, if I'm a financial analyst, I can apply math and advanced analytics and AI to that. If I'm an engineer, obviously I can build AI tools, right? I mean, part of the engineering discipline is obviously you can build any tool you want. But if I'm in any kind of line of business, white collar or blue collar, you can apply those learnings into your job. So it's hard for me to understand the question, because I think we've made this thing really mysterious by calling it AI. Right? At the end of the day, is applying a discipline to a function for a business outcome. You can do that in any business context you want, and it's not. There's nothing artificial. I mean, we use the word artificial intelligence.
So let me walk you through like kind of the teams I used to solve problems, right? So when I was at Monsanto, we were transforming the manufacturing business in Monsanto. And on my team, I have machine learning engineers, what you think of as data scientists. I had decision optimization engineers, I had data engineers, and I had data visualization experts. That was my team. Whenever I would solve a problem, I would go to the business and I would say, I need someone with a subject matter expert. And in the case of the manufacturing, we got people from the manufacturing floor that served as product owners. And so those people who were on the manufacturing floor were part of the project. And actually, the benefit to them, to me, was at the end, well, first of all, we got a better solution, back to my human comment, right? They were the ones that brought it back to their peers. And they started saying, this is great, I helped do it, this is how it's going to help our life better. It's, it's not going to, we're not going to create jobs with this, but it's not going to take away our jobs. It's going to make us be able to focus on better things, right? So they actually were the advocates for it. But today I've added some other skills to that. So I have journalists that work on my team. So I have people that have complete journalism backgrounds. I have people that are teachers. I mean, I have a musician on my team. I have a huge breadth of people. I have old people, I have young, I have a guy that's 65 years old on my team, and I have a woman who's 22-year-old on my team. That diversity is just as important as male-female, as black-brown, as religious perspectives, even language is really important to have that kind of diversity, because you think different depending on how you learn language, how many languages you learn. And to the question about the built-in bias in the models, right? How you think, the more diversity you have in a team, the less likely you are to make a mistake without considering all perspectives, right? Take, Alexa. When Alexa first came out, I could ask Alexa to do anything and she always listened to me. Unless my wife talked like this, Alexa never understood her, right? Why is that? Well, because a bunch of young white dudes built Alexa.
Yeah, to bounce back to what you mentioned, so I think that it's rather machine intelligence than artificial intelligence. And regarding also, I have some question mark regarding autonomous cars, because there will be always question marks. If you go on the left, you have some unexpected situation. If you go on the left, so it's something bad, and also on the right, also it might not be very nice. So, but the machine, so I have some question mark regarding the autonomous cars.
I have mixed emotions about autonomous cars. You don't quite know what I think about them yet, but at the same time, every 6 months you hear about an accident an autonomous car was in. You don't even hear about accidents that humans are in because they happen so often.
So it's our time to almost wrap up. So we're here to discover a little bit what's for 2022. Okay, so let's start by Shadi. What's your take on 2022? What shall we see in terms of AI? Okay, not COVID.
Oh, okay. I thought we'd get back together and start drinking in a public space. I think you'll see one of the themes, and you alluded to this, around multidisciplinary or composite AI, the fact that machine learning is one of many disciplines. So sometimes applying a machine learning algorithm is the last thing you want to do because a forecasting model or an optimization model, right, or a simple linear regression model will work a lot better for you. And bringing all those things together, and we're seeing a lot of the software vendors move into that space, right? You want to stitch together the disciplines that make sense for you, because you want to make, you may want to feed the machine learning output into a forecasting model, right? And so I think you're going to see an emphasis on that. Responsible AI, and we've talked a lot about that. What does it actually mean for a vendor? Do I need to start putting in controls in my software so people can't abuse that, right? Programming languages are very strong. Regardless of the one you want to use, you can always abuse it. But if I provide a tool, a feature, a function, what controls do I put in place other than written in a contract that says you can't do this? Right, so I have to be, as a builder of software, hold people accountable to the way they use it. So responsible AI, and then tooling around that, continuing to expand around, you know, opening the black box that advanced analytics built. That'll be most of our, I think most of the investments in most vendors. Democratization of data will continue for, right, we've talked a little about low code, no code, but how can we enable the business expert to not have to worry about it? I have a question, I have data, I get an answer that's good enough to get me started, and then if I need to call the expert, I call them, but I don't have to call the expert every time I need an answer. That for me, 2022.
Christophe?
Yeah, so I think the future of AI is human. I'm a bit, provoking. Yeah, because I think that we need, now with the COVID-19, you know, we need really to integrate all impacting variables beyond economic and financial. So we have to integrate, especially geopolitics is gaining ground more and more. You talk about GDPR, we can talk about the Cloud Act and so on. We can talk about some of the places. So we have to integrate a huge number of variables to achieve sustainability and really to have this future perspective. And I think that the future of the AI is human, and we will achieve augmented results. Yeah.
Isn't artificial anyway human? Because the definition of artificial, isn't it made by human anyway? So.
Yeah, but by using, if we can achieve this kind of this magic, because there is a convergence. With time, we converge toward the same point. So we can achieve the magic and have this perspective, and perhaps at the end, because as a human, we focus on most of people. They focus on solving short-term problems, and now we need to achieve this long-term perspective. So the magic would be the right combination between sometimes we use the machine, other times we use more human, and then we'll achieve augmented results and which are sustainable. I mean, I believe in that.
Seth?
So I think of AI actually as augmented intelligence. I really don't even think about it as artificial intelligence. I should actually say it out loud more often than I do instead of just saying AI. So I think there's a couple aspects to this question. So what is the business impact of AI going to be this year? I think 2020 with COVID really accelerated the adoption of conversational AI because we had to survive to get questions answered. And so 2020 was a year where we saw an acceleration of 10 years of digital transformation essentially into 1 year. And so from a business perspective, I think you're going to see businesses taking advantage of that shift that they made and starting to get more comfortable implementing other types of AI to run their business. So that's from a business perspective. From an AI perspective, in 2022, I'm sorry, I meant 2021, not 2020, sorry. In 2022, we're going to start seeing the introduction of, you can think of it as constraint-based learning. These are things that you hear about, like it's called neurosymbolic learning or logical neural nets, where AI is being taught to reason like humans do. And you're going to start seeing that get implemented into AI providers and algorithms that are coming out that help us solve problems that would have been solved before, because the space was just too big, that computationally it was impossible to solve the problem before, and by putting constraints on the problem, essentially limiting the domain, you can then solve those problems. The other value it has is neurosymbolic learning specifically allows you to pick up a model and retrain it just based on the context of the business it's in, instead of having to retrain the whole model. So it fully enables something that we call transfer learning, which is you take a model from over here and you put it over here and it starts working. And so I think that's going to be the big technology that's going to start picking up this year, on top of, I think, the things that you guys said are spot on as well.
So, Christophe, you've got to wait because I think we're right on time. I'm already 10 minutes late, actually. So thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. And a little souvenir from Chapel Hill, which is the best city in the triangle. You probably know it.
Artificial intelligence. Data. Analytics.
User group.
AIDA UG.
Join AIDA UG today.